Good evening, everyone. Emerging Revolutionary War. I'm Rob Orson. I'm with Mark Malloy, Dan Welch, and Kevin Pollock. I've been waiting for this moment for many years since I was a child. This is the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, or as they call it, destruction of the tea.
Huzzah!
Mark always has to get a huzzah in. Behind me, really quick, there's a plaque placed here by DAR many years ago, marking the site of Griffins Wharf. We're not exactly sure of the location of Griffins Wharf because the landscape here in Boston has changed a lot since 1773. But what's important is there is a lot of people out here tonight. We're very impressed with the amount of people that have turned out to celebrate and commemorate the Boston Tea Party or the destruction of the tea. So this is one of our one of our second or third videos that we're bringing to you tonight as we do the anniversary here. Kevin and Mark and Dan are going to talk about some of the history of this place, but it's a special spot. Obviously the Tea Party Museum, it's getting hard to see, but the water's over to my right, your left. The Tea Party Museum is going to be commemorating this event tonight. We're going to do some live streaming of that, but the actual spot is right here. We're actually on this spot, pretty close to where it happened in 1773, December 16th. We just left Old South Meeting House. Got a ton of people up there. We marched down Milk Street just as the mob did that night. We came down here, and we're going to commemorate this a little bit with some history here. And I'm going to turn to Dan. Dan, some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and one of the great things that ERW does is go to those actual spots. I mean, it's been great to see the reenactment this evening, just a little bit further into the harbor, but we're standing in the area where Griffins Wharf was 250 years ago, where we have 3 ships that are going to be completely removed of all of their cargo of tea. We're really looking forward to the reenactment itself, but very, very happy to be here in the exact spot. One of the things that there's many misconceptions about the Boston Tea Party is the crowd, as Rob mentioned, is the mob that comes here. There's actually going to be 2 separate groups that are going to be converging on their way to this location. The first is the mob that's going to be coming from the Old South Meeting House. These are the folks that have been in attendance. They've been listening to Sam Adams. They've been listening to Joseph Warren in there. And now they're heading and making their way down what is modern-day Milk Street. As Rob has mentioned, Boston has changed dramatically in 250 years. At the time was Hutchinson Street at the time. The mob's making their way down to this location. But there's a separate group of folks that are making their way here to Griffins Wharf. And those are the ones that have dressed in various forms of Native American or indigenous costumes for that evening. There's accounts of some that have worn feathers, some that are dressed up just simply in face paint, some that are donning capes and cloaks to disguise themselves as they're making their way down here. These are going to be the folks that are, by and large, going to be on the boats, destroying the crates of tea and tossing the remnants over the sides and into the harbor itself. And I think one of the really interesting, contentious parts of this moment is exactly that. What were they wearing on the evening of December 16th, 1773? And for that, I'm going to turn it over to our very own dressed ERW historian, Mark Malloy.
He's been very popular in the local bars and pubs tonight in Boston.
Yes, you gotta dress the way they dressed back in 1773. I'm dressed as a common person here in Boston coming down to witness what's about to happen in Griffins Wharf, which actually stood right where we're standing. Again, being in the place where history actually happened, nothing beats it. The only thing that can beat it is being in that place at the exact time on the exact anniversary, and that's what we're doing right now. We're right here where the Boston Tea Party actually happened. And yeah, as Dan had mentioned, that a lot of times, a lot of the images you'll see, it looks like that they're Indians. They have feathers in their hat, maybe a full headdress, sometimes shirtless. A lot of that's been exaggerated, but of course they were trying to disguise themselves. It is important to remember that it was a crime what these people were doing. They were destroying private property, and they wanted to make sure they didn't have any sort of connection to the crime happening. So a lot of times they would cover their face sometimes with soot or other kinds of paint so that to disguise their faces. And then they also had these large cloaks, and perhaps had a feather or two, maybe. Part of that Mohawk identity, though, was important to American, tying into the identity of being Americans, as the Indians had been here for hundreds of years, operating free. They viewed themselves in that same kind of similar light. And they say, as the people started coming down, they would hear the Indian war whoops as they were coming down. So you can imagine the area being filled with the woo, woo, woo of all these people screaming the Indian war whoops. And as they came down here and then walked out and looked out onto Griffins Wharf, again, where we're standing, and where we're about to see it reenacted here in just about an hour or so. And if you want to watch that reenactment, yeah, stay tuned here to ERW, but you can also see a live stream with Boston Tea Party 250. They're actually going to be live streaming the whole reenactment, but you can imagine the kind of chaos that came out of that. But yeah, so being able to wear what they wore and stand where they stood is pretty amazing. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kevin. Kevin's going to talk about the Tea Party, what happened here as well. So.
We've been trying to pull Kevin into the Rev War from the Civil
War. Slowly. It is great being here, though, and really cool, obviously, to stand on the spot. So one thing that's interesting to me about the Tea Party and thinking about just the larger aspect of all of this, of course, this stems from the Tea Act of 1773, which is essentially a bailout by King George III in Parliament of the East India Company to have essentially a monopoly on tea sales here in the colonies itself. And as called for in that law, ships, when they came into harbor or port here, like in Boston, like the Dartmouth did on November 28th, they had 20 days to unload their cargo and then to pay for the taxes and pay for the levies on that cargo itself. So the colonists had been meeting at places like Old South Meeting House, Faneuil Hall, in the days leading up to this, trying to figure out what to do about the tea itself. They appealed to Governor Thomas Hutchinson to try and basically tell him to take these ships, order them to take their tea all the way back to England, which they couldn't do. And once they found out on the night of December 16th, which was really almost the 11th hour for this cargo to be unloaded from 3 ships out here at Griffins Wharf, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, that's when the colonists decided to act. So as we've talked about, they came down here to Griffins Wharf. This was a very calculated maneuver by these colonists. We've already talked about how they tried to disguise themselves, cloak themselves in secrecy, so as not to be discovered, because this was an illegal act. But they moved on to the ships. They were very, very calculative, again, about not damaging any other property, only the tea itself. In fact, one padlock was broken on one of the ships, and it was replaced the next day, because they were, again, very careful to not damage their cargo beyond the tea itself. But overall, the contents of 340 chests of tea were dumped into Boston Harbor here behind us. It totaled over 92,000 pounds of tea itself. And in today's currency, the amount of financial damage that was done to the East India Company was about $1.75 million in today's currency. So this was an incredibly large operation. It was a calculated operation as well, and of course something that was incredibly important to ultimately the start of the American Revolution itself. And I think the argument could be made that this may have been really one of the many starts of the American Revolution right here on December 16, 1773.
Well, you know, one of the things that both Kevin and Mark have alluded on, particularly about their dress and being disguised, is that this is an illegal act. After the dust settles from the events of December 16, 1773, there is only one colonist that is arrested for the actions that will take place by both the mob and those that have been organizing for several weeks to get on board these boats and to dump the tea. And that man's name is Francis Akeley. He's the only one that's going to be arrested for this crime, as again, as both of these gentlemen have mentioned, was illegal. Akeley's future will continue to support the cause of freedom and the cause of liberty, and unfortunately will be cut to a tragic end at the Battle of Bunker Hill just several years later.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. We're glad you guys are watching ahead. I want to thank Matthew Wilding from the Revolutionary Spaces. I want to thank Evan O'Brien at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum, who was great to host us a couple of days ago. I want to thank Christian Despigno, the Joseph Warren Foundation, The folks over at the Masonic Lodge had a great symposium today, lots of great speakers. I want to thank John Adams, who provided to us Joseph Warren cigars for the occasion. Now, Joseph Warren was not here at the wharf. He was too smart for that. Him and Sam Adams and the others kind of architect this whole operation, but stayed above the fray and let others conduct some of these operations. But as you said, this is a very complex situation. It's very nuanced, as history always is. But I do believe this is where the American Revolution starts. It starts right here in Griffins Wharf, December 16th, 1773. We're here at ERW on the 20th anniversary. Stay tuned. We have a few more videos left tonight. Stay up with us and have a good time watching with us.
Woo! Huzzah!
Ah!